Welcome to the November webinar for Fahey Schultz, following up on our e-letter here. We're getting launched a little early, but that should let everyone get into the Zoom meeting here and get logged on. Of course, we'll give folks a couple minutes just after the noontime hour to get in. As you know, you can submit questions with, there's a Q&A feature, should be at the bottom of your screen where you can get questions in. And then also the comments section, you can also submit questions that way. So I will be happy to answer your questions. I think we're going to have plenty of time here at the end to get to those. This is a bit of an interesting topic. So happy to take those questions. Whatever comes up, I'll do my best to answer as many of them as I can. Also, before we get started, I want to highlight another educational session that we are putting on here at Fahey Schultz Burzek Rhodes. That is our elected officials workshop, continuing to build off our work that we do in the first part of the year, the end of the year, educating you folks. So December 7th, we're hosting that workshop focusing on some interesting topics for not newly elected officials necessarily, but currently elected officials. You've been on boards and now you've started to see some interesting issues come up. So we want to present on those. So again, that's going to be December 7th. We're going to start just around noon, so get here a little early to get lunch, and it will be in person. So we're going to be hosting that in person here in the Lansing-Okemos area. We just sent out another email on that, so there's details if you're on our e-letter list. There's details on how you can get signed up and registered and where we're going to be and all those fun things. If you're not on our e-letter list, then you can go to our website and sign up, and then certainly you'll get you'll get those notices in the future. And then there's also my contact information here in this presentation. Reach out to us, so let us know. We'll get you the information. We'd love to see you there. Again, that's December 7th. We'll be starting at noon, going to the end of the day. We'll have a cocktail hour reception after, where again you can get into your questions as well as serving you lunch right at the beginning. And then just to tie back to my initial comments to anyone who's logged in since we got started, you can of course ask questions for this presentation, and I look forward to answering those. Should have plenty of time to do that. So use the Q&A feature or use the chat box, and when we get to the end here, I'll take a look at those, and we'll answer as many of your questions as you can. And then we do post these presentations as well to our website, so that also will be helpful information to you as, again, a supplement, of course, to the e-letter itself, which went out last month. So today we're talking about industrial hemp, what it is and what your township can do about it. Different than marijuana, although in the same family. So an interesting wrinkle on something we've been talking a lot about. Of course, up front, we'll put this disclaimer out there. It's a presentation for general information. This is not specific legal advice. We're not creating an attorney-client relationship. And if you do have specific issues, reach out to your township attorney for assistance on that specific legal issue where you can really dive into what you have going on. But for now, we'll just be giving some general overview, some general information to hopefully build up that knowledge base. So what is hemp? That's the first question, right? It is a cannabis plant, so whether cannabis sativa or cannabis indica, and it's been used worldwide for a variety of consumer products. Of course, most famously, it would be hemp rope, I think, is pretty well-known derivative from the plant. So the question being then, okay, if hemp is a cannabis plant and it's derived from the same plant as marijuana, what's the difference between hemp and marijuana? And it comes down to your THC content, that psychoactive compound, which is what makes marijuana a drug, versus what makes cannabis or hemp a legally possessable plant with a much lower regulation threshold, comes down to that THC content, which is very low at 0.3% THC, so well less than 1%. I think that's what, 3/1000ths of a particulate. So we're talking something that is intended to be very unintoxicating, something that is not going to get you a high. As we'll go through, some of the other uses of THC, or I'm sorry, of hemp. One thing it does contain is CBD. So that's a cannabidiol, which isn't linked to a high or an intoxication effect, but it does have anti-anxiety and potentially even antidepressant effects. So that is something that is continuing to be explored and researched and utilized in a couple different ways. But that is one of the big benefits, looking at a hemp marketplace, is being able to get access to those CBD oils and potentially those CBD medicines, and using those in different products. There's then also, I just want to touch on briefly, differences between even THC itself. There's a Delta 9, which is the traditional THC compound that's isolated, but also Delta 8. They're both still THC. It comes down to some of the technical chemical makeup where the carbon bonding occurs, which then can get you into very technical legal rules about whether or not it's regulated or not. And we did see in the last year, 2 years, a big market push into Delta 8 THC because it was getting through some of these technical definitions. And that Delta 8 THC was coming out of CBD or hemp products because of the way those definitions were overlapped. There were concerns about how that was being created and regulated, whether it was really something safe, how it was getting into the marketplace. In Michigan, at least, there has been successful legislation pushing back on that. I know there's been legislative and regulatory effects in other jurisdictions, or regulatory efforts in other jurisdictions to kind of close this loophole, make sure that we're regulating all THC. So Michigan's Cannabis Regulatory Agency is now taking regulatory authority over Delta H starting last year. So actually October of 2021, they changed those definitions, and we've moved just to a cannabis definition broadly, and dropping some of this difference between sativa or indica, and covering all those different types of THC. So hopefully getting some good regulatory work on that. The other question is, okay, how do we determine that the industrial hemp is 0.3%? So the hemp acts have regulatory requirements, and they have regulatory testing facilities that are then identified within those acts. So those are laboratories that are regulated, typically registered, I think, with the DEA, but certainly a regulated, registered laboratory that then the state, in this case it would be MDARD, is going to take that hemp and have it tested. So it does set up that testing framework within the different acts. So then kind of how we got here, giving an overview of the different pieces of hemp regulation along the way. 2014, we had the Michigan Industrial Hemp Research and Development Act. This was really starting as an initial way to say, hey, hemp is different than marijuana. Let's try and break open this supply chain. Let's try and start some research beyond rope, right? What else can we use hemp for? With the way it was regulated at the federal level, made that very challenging, because hemp was marijuana. There wasn't that drug distinction in THC at the federal level. So any cannabis plant was a controlled substance. So you saw this effort at the local level to start carving out those distinctions and open a space for essentially universities to start researching, regulating hemp, doing some growing, some cultivating, trying to understand that plant and how it can be differentiated from marijuana, right? And so then we're starting to see the ability to test and find that threshold of 0.3 THC without triggering federal oversight. And of course, even that 2014 Act is itself an outgrowth of the different states that were coming in and legalizing marijuana itself. Again, even though it was still federally and remains federally illegal, we had medical marijuana here in the state of Michigan back in 2008 with the patient caregiver model, the initial marijuana acts. Putting those in place, of course, that's opening the door. And then there's the conversation about, okay, how can we get hemp into this now that sort of that market is starting to develop and finding ways to do that. So that's initially what happens in 2014 in the Michigan space. So then 2018, we have the federal farm bill. So that was the big sea change where the federal government stepped in and said, okay, we've seen these state laboratories, experimenting with how they can utilize hemp and regulate hemp. And they essentially got enough feedback or there was enough data and support to take hemp off of the controlled substance list. So in that farm bill, it removed the hemp with that definition of no THC, 0.3%, removed that from the Controlled Substances Act. So it's no longer defined as a controlled substance, which then ipso facto creates legality, because it's no longer illegal to simply possess a cannabis plant if you can show that that cannabis plant did not have elevated levels of THC. Along with the Farm Bill, it did a couple of other things. It opened up and created a federal regulatory structure to then move forward with, now that you can possess the hemp, just like in the Michigan Industrial Act, to come in and say, okay, how are we going to develop a program around this? What can we do to foster research, kind of start building or opening up supply chains and things of that nature? So then there's also a federal rule that complements the Farm Bill itself. So that's in the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 990 of Chapter 7. You can look that up. There's a great 85 pages of preparatory remarks and sort of justification and overview of what's happened in hemp. And then there's 10 pages of federal rules. So a pretty large document, but the majority of the actual text of the rules are relatively small, speaking to the whole piece of the document. As we'll continue to get into, the 2018 Farm Bill explicitly preserved the Food and Drug Administration's authority over hemp products. So even though you had this legalization to possess the plant, there continues to be regulation and control over the products that are then derived from the hemp. So simply because you have a hemp and a CBD product, that is not automatically legal under the federal Farm Bill. If you want to put a product into interstate commerce, that still is going to need to meet FDA regulations, especially if you're, utilizing it as a food or drug. And then once that bill gets put in place and you get the federal rules put in place to establish that framework, then Michigan came back and said, okay, now we want to get our hemp research in line with the USDA's rules, right? And how the federal government is going to do this so that we can talk to each other, work together. So that's where you then see Michigan come in and update their Hemp Act for the 2020 Hemp Growers Act, and really also focused on hemp cultivation versus hemp processing. And that act in Michigan, the 2020 Hemp Growers Act, states that a person shall not grow industrial hemp unless the person is registered as a grower. So even though it's legal to possess from a criminal standpoint, in terms of actually growing hemp, you do have to get state authority to do that. So that application then comes through the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. So they administer the growing portion of hemp, and you still have to get, like I just said, a authorization from the state to grow that product. So even though there's an argument and a position that okay, this is just an agricultural product, right, because it's in the Farm Bill. So that's one viewpoint is, hey, I should be able to grow this just like I can grow any other agricultural product. If I can grow corn, if I can grow soybeans, if I can grow tobacco, I should be able to grow hemp, particularly as we'll get into from a local government and zoning perspective. But it's not really the same. It's not a one-to-one comparison because you have this application requirement, and you have to get that state approval to grow the crop, which isn't, the same with corn. So with MDARD, the application's not entirely, it's not prohibitive. It's not a very compliant. The compliance process for growing hemp is not the same as the compliance process for growing marijuana. Marijuana has a much more robust compliance process, has much higher application fees, has more robust enforcement and inspection that's going to occur, and that is all because of the drug component, right? When you have a psychoactive component, when you're growing THC, that is going to be much more heavily regulated than when you're just growing industrial hemp. At the same time, there are still requirements. You have to provide the acreage and the square footage. So how much hemp are you planning to grow? Where are you going to grow it? Give us an idea of where you're going to be, how much you're going to grow. Again, for their purposes, they're trying to get a handle on the market as well. How much hemp is going to be available for use. So they're tracking these numbers, or at least attempting to, and identify specifically with GPS coordinates exactly where that hemp will be grown, whether that's in a field outdoor, whether that's in a greenhouse, or whether that's in more of an industrial grow light building that we see more with the marijuana, as well as maps that are going to depict the same. Yeah, then we have signage on the next one. So that's part of your application requirements, getting that put in. There's also criminal history pieces that are incorporated as well. So they're looking at that. Importantly, the application and much of the hemp, how do I want to say this, infrastructure or participants in the program, it's exempt from disclosure under FOIA. So they're protected from a lot of that. Of course, if they're submitting, criminal histories, if they're going to admit to something that happened, when they were a college kid or whatever, that's something that you do want to shield from disclosure. So it's not necessarily a bad policy, but it is something to know. There's going to be a limit on how much information you can get as a local government official from these state regulators, because there are protections for those applicants. Also, interestingly, the application process, when you get into the statute, there are specific statutory criteria for the denial. So it kind of constrains how MDARD is going to review those applications. If there's a complete application, unless they're identifying some of these denial criteria, they're going to issue the growing license. And these are one-year permits, so they apply every year. So they apply and reapply each year. And getting the growing license authorizes that individual to both grow and dry, as well as store industrial hemp. That drying component was something that was recently added. So there's a little bit of processing that they can do from a drying perspective, but it's really just trying to get it to a stable place where they can store it so that a grower is able to do those things. What they're required to do once they have their grower permit, they're required to report their acreage that they've registered for with both MDARD and the USDA. So those grower forms are required to be submitted, again, to get compliance, get an idea of how big this market is. And they're also required to allow law enforcement inspection. Again, anytime without notice, they can come in, they can inspect the crop and to, again, ensure compliance. So by signing up as a grower, you're signing on to that program and to allow law enforcement to keep an eye on you. As well, signage must be posted in a conspicuous location for whether it's a field that you're growing hemp or whether it's a greenhouse building, to identify that this is hemp that's being grown there. You have to include your registration number. You have to, give the name of the grower, who's responsible for that grow. And then it's supposed to be something that's weather resistant, right? Because this is going to be an exterior and outside sign. So you want it to be something that's going to be robust. And this is a way that the local officials that you can get a handle on, easily if hemp is being grown in your backyard, so to speak. You should be able to find a sign, right? That's going to be the easiest way driving around. As part of the access for law enforcement is also the testing then of the THC. So in the growing process, they have to permit the MDARD officials to come on site. They're going to take a sample of the hemp crop and they're going to test that THC level to ensure, again, that it's below that threshold. If the grower fails the test, then they can come back out and get a retest. So there is a retest opportunity. If it's failing again, then the hemp crop gets destroyed. So if it turns out to be marijuana because it has a higher concentration of THC, that's then going to be removed. MDARD is going to handle destruction of that product or ensure its destruction so that it doesn't become an illicit source of marijuana coming into the market. Additional limitations for the grower: you can't grow within a dwelling, so you've got to have a different area. You can't actually sell or transport the hemp plants or the hemp seeds, so that's pretty critical. It's constrained. The grower is constrained to simply growing, which means you often then see a processor handler license, which is the next component, right in conjunction. If I'm a farmer, if I'm trying to make this into a profitable crop, I'm going to have both a grower license and I'm going to have a processor handler license so that I can then right away go to those next steps and market and sell. But the grower itself cannot sell other than to a processor handler or a medical marijuana facility, a medical marijuana processor. Now, and that's also very interesting. It's again an attempt to expand the supply chain that's going to be available to these hemp growers, because on the other hand, you might be someone who wants to grow it and knows they have sophistication and skill to do that, but not necessarily the sophistication and skill to do the processing, or that's just not a piece that they're interested in, right? They're like, I'm a grower, I'm a good grower, I want to focus on growing. I don't want to do the processing. It's trying to open up again that supply chain. It also opens the door then to more cross uses for CBD and that Delta 8 THC that we saw, where if you're getting it into then the medical marijuana facilities and then getting some processing there, coming over and coming into the medical marijuana market. And it was something that the CRA admitted was happening throughout the market and throughout the supply chains, that hemp product was then coming into the medical market, and they're attempting still to get some regulations in place to kind of control that and at least understand how that's happening. But it's certainly out there. So then the other license that I indicated as this hemp processor handler license, this is going to be your next step. Very similar in terms of application process, GPS coordinates where the industrial hemp is going to be processed, also exempt from FOIA. The distinctions are what it allows them to do. First of all, they can do additional processing. So that's taking the hemp and processing it into CBD, extracting those oils, reducing that down. So doing all that industrial work to process it out, as well as who now handles the applications. That has shifted from MDARD into the Cannabis Regulatory Agency. So the CRA is taking a much more active role than at the processor side. Growing is easier, much more expansive, coming in under MDARD. Processing then is getting a closer look from CRA, because again, that's where we're now taking that hemp and creating those products that potentially can touch and get tangentially introduced into then the marijuana supply chain and the marijuana markets. So I think that's part of the reason the state made that move, again, looking at those regulations. So the uses of hemp, now that we have this new hemp infrastructure in terms of growing, what are people trying to do with it? So this is a diagram that we found from, a group that's promoting this. So hemp advocates see thousands of uses, right? It says there are 50,000 different uses. That's a lot of uses. I won't vouch for them, but you do hear from those folks of the different uses. It's more than just THC, CBD from their perspective, right? They want to promote all the other uses. You see some of the classic ones there, textiles, right? Fiber, so you can make hemp pants, hemp clothes. Also the rope, right? We've talked about, very popular, as well as oils and seeds that you can get various uses and pieces out of that. Some of the oil is not necessarily something that's going to be used for food or medically. You can see some hemp moisturizer type products, and those sorts of things that are external, that you would rub on sort of as a lotion. Less concern from the FDA there, because that's not a food. That's not something that's being consumed. One item that I would just kind of highlight to give you an idea of what the hemp advocates are using the product for. There's a Detroit company producing something called Imperium Filler, and they're marketing that as a replacement with plastic processing. So when they're creating plastics, they're using other fillers like talc and calcium carbonate, and this Detroit company is stepping in and saying, hey, you can actually use hemp fibers for those filler pieces in plastic, and reduce your cost and sometimes reduce the weight of your product. And then they're claiming that it's more environmentally friendly because you're growing a plant, right, instead of using a different substance. So that's going to be taking CO2 out of the atmosphere just from growing. So then folks are talking about carbon footprint. So they're positioning themselves to be an environmentally friendly alternative to some of these other industrial things that you might use. So you'll see you'll see lots of claims. Again, I won't vouch for any of those, but it is very interesting, and it is one of the goals from sort of a policy perspective, is to at least open the door to allow that research and that kind of venture capital to take place. What can we use hemp for? Can we regulate it responsibly? so that if there are beneficial uses, then we can open those doors and we can use that where it can be helpful. So that comes around then to, where is the use really? And predominantly it's in the CBD oil. 70% of Michigan hemp growers, that's what they were looking at, right? That's where the money was. So that's where they were taking their hemp and then processing it into those CBD oils for uses in all sorts of then other products, whether that's in sort of skin creams or tinctures that I kind of mentioned before. You could put it in there, or then folks are also putting it into more food products and making these claims or believing that it's having those effects of reducing anxiety, reducing pain. And there's certainly anecdotal evidence of that being the case, and there's some discussion within the sort of scientific literature or from the FDA's perspective that okay, there's some basis for those claims, although again, not well understood because it's new, right? Because the market has just recently been opened. So other interesting things with CBD, in 2018, the FDA did approve a drug for seizure treatment, and the active ingredient in that drug was CBD. Epidiolex, I believe, was the name. So again, that's the breakthrough. That's opening that door, opening that window to get more uses, and acknowledging and having some scientific basis to say, yes, CBD as an active ingredient now has been shown to reduce seizures for that specific medicine, which was very helpful, and then lends some credibility to kind of these other claims. But it also means that CBD now is an active ingredient in a drug, which means from the FDA's perspective, it is not something that's merely a dietary supplement. It's not something that is unregulated or unproven for those uses. Instead, it is now a regulated drug, and in the ways those regulations came together and opened up, as we saw at the top of the presentation, it's not something that was commonly accepted as a dietary supplement. So when you see folks marketing these products and saying, oh, contains CBD, dietary supplement, it'll calm you down, remove your anxiety, those are going to be violations and flags from the FDA's perspective, because it is not a food product. Both the Michigan regulator, MDARD, and the federal regulators, the FDA, are very clear that CBD is not an approved food product. It cannot be introduced into interstate commerce. So essentially, those products that you're seeing at gas stations and convenience stores and wherever else really are not compliant with the federal regulations. And so I'm just going to advance ahead here really quick. So this is an example of a warning letter that the FDA sent out to a group that was doing exactly that. And the interesting piece here for this particular warning letter is that this isn't even CBD for human consumption. This is CBD for animal consumption. This was a dog product, a canine soft chew, and I think they had a CBD hemp pellet or something that they were promoting and selling. And the FDA came out and said, hey, that is an unapproved new animal drug that is unsafe under the FDA statute and the FDA rules because it hasn't passed any compliance testing. And this is the FDA warning this group that, hey, you're in violation of federal law, and that can impose some penalties, fines, and costs, et cetera, on you. And there's a number of these warning letters that are out on the FDA's website They've been issuing these warning letters since 2015, so there's a long history of that stance saying, no, this is not an approved food product. Just because you have CBD in it, just because hemp is legal, doesn't mean the derivative, the processed product coming out of it, has been approved in that form for either human or animal consumption. So again, some of the claims that are being made or advanced by advocates, the regulation isn't there for it yet, and those uses can get you into some hot water from a producer side. I just want to come back to the CBD slide here again really quickly, because there are three hemp products that have been approved by the FDA. So they have a generally recognized as safe process. So that's when, okay, we've taken a look at whatever your additive is, and there's some testing, some science backing it. We can say, okay, it's got positive impacts and it isn't a negative. So those three products are from hemp seed, and they are whole hemp seed protein powder, and hemp seed oil. So there you can look at those, generally recognized as safe approval letters. But those three products can be legally used in the U.S. food supply. So that's the exception to the rule, where generally it's not a food product, and CBD oil is not a food product, but these three derivatives of hemp seeds, the whole seed, the protein powder, and the oil, can be introduced into food supply. So there are some legitimate uses where you're not going to get that warning letter. So that's our background. That's our fundamental or our foundation for what hemp is, where it's come from, where it's going. So then the question for us, right, as local government officials is, what can we do about it? What potentially should we be concerned about? How can we remain active? Well, and the first thing is, you can keep an eye out for growing and processing activity. Those signs are required to be posted. So if there's a concern, if there's complaints, you can, kind of just drive by and look for those signs. There is, put it on the top here, and you can still get some of the same complaints from hemp that you would get from marijuana, which is that odor complaint. Because again, being the same plant from a sort of base level, the way it flowers and matures, you can still have some odor when it's flowering, especially again with an outdoor grow. If you've got someone who's registered as a hemp grower growing in a field, you can get some odor complaints from that. And that's one way you can check, right there without having to get super involved, is just to see if you can identify that sign. You can also confirm that the minimum requirements of the Act, are being met. Look at, then you see those signs or you're getting these complaints, you can start asking the questions, where's your grower's license? When was it applied for? Check in with MDARD, especially as a local government official. Say, hey, I've had these complaints. I've noticed this sign. I want to confirm that's in compliance. Have a conversation with the regulator. See what they'll give you and what they'll get you. We may also still be able to put some zoning control in place. Again, it's a new use, so there's some still question marks about how far zoning can go. Of course, I think the pro hemp side wants to say we are an agricultural product just like any other agricultural product, even though, yes, we have to go get this license from the state. They want to, when it comes to zoning, they want to say if we're in an agricultural district, then we should be fine from a zoning perspective. That may or may not be the case with the fact that you do have to go get that state license. And we have seen some success getting special use permits and requiring those special use permits for individuals in the hemp in the hemp world, especially on the processor handler. That is certainly the easier case to make, because you're then taking that product, you're no longer growing it, and now you're processing it, you're changing it from what was grown into, that derivative, whether that's the CBD oil, or you're taking the stalks and you're getting fiber out of it, and doing whatever else with the hemp product. So potentially a stronger case, or some more options with special use permits on the processor side. Both state acts do have some preemption language, and it's typically that municipalities shall not adopt any rules or ordinances that are going to restrict or limit what is permitted under the act. So, okay, we can't contravene state law, we get that. The Industrial Hemp Research and Development Act, so our first act, has some stronger language, or some additional language about preemption that the act is going to control relative to other local regulations. For growers, that's not as clear. Again, we know that we're not going to be able to override state law, but whether it's also going to actively preempt, basic zoning. Are you going to be able to put up a plot of industrial hemp in an industrial district, for example, which would be, kind of odd. It's not clear, how you're going to be able to bring that in as a local government. But I think there's space there, and I think it's something that the local officials should keep in mind. Okay, we know those sections are there. We're going to work with the state, and I think it's taking that mindset of, let's work with the state regulator, because it is a regulated product. Let's get on the same page and work together rather than against each other to control any negative land use impacts from someone seeking to do hemp in your community. Additional ways you can stay involved and keep kind of your finger on the pulse is the upcoming Farm Bill. So that's 2018, and we are now in 2020, which means the federal government's looking at a new Farm Bill. So that's our 2023 Farm Bill. I've got the link there. You can Google it as well, of course, but they are taking input. So they're taking input on how hemp is now going to move forward at the federal level. So if you've got some strong thoughts about that, you can reach out. You can put those in there and remain involved at that level. Currently, they're looking at putting hemp into, let's see, I think it's 4 titles. So there's going to be hemp research grants the federal government's going to explore. Again, trying to build out that research component, see what we can do, what is going to be beneficial. Hemp cultivation, so growing, and even hemp crop insurance. So I don't think there was a crop insurance available for hemp at this point. Don't quote me on that, but in any event, they're expanding and looking at that in the new Farm Bill. And then again, the controlled substances exclusion will be another piece. Whether or not there will be tweaks or changes to that, remains to be seen. So the federal government continues to look at this and is going to continue to work and expand on the hemp front in the 2023 bill, and you can still have input on how that's formed, both directly with the USDA, as well as, of course, your federal representatives. At the same time, we would expect to see potential review of the regulations. Again, there is the title in the CFR, so those can be reviewed and updated. So local governments still remain relevant, right? I think that's the key takeaway. There are things you can do to stay relevant, whether that's at the state or federal level. And then, of course, if there is an issue, if there's things you need to get a handle on in your local community, work with your township attorney. They can get into these pieces and bring a little bit of more heft to that and help you understand, exactly how you would need to proceed forward, whether it's going to be with a grower piece or a processor piece, and help you explore your options, and get that moving ahead for you. Sorry about that. So questions, I'll get over there and see if I can get into your questions. Got my information here on the slide. I do note that we do have Chad Karsten's email there. Please feel free to email Chad all of your hemp questions. I would love for him to get them all and then be very confused. That would be very entertaining for me. Of course, if you want your answer sooner, you can email me. And as you can see, it's going to be first initial of the first name and then the last name. That's our email address. So I'm M Kuschel, that's MKUSCHEL at fsbrlaw.com. And let me see if I can pull up questions. I've got them over here. First question is, let me get it over here. First question is, can you print out the PowerPoint? Yes, that should be possible. If you want to print out the PowerPoint, we can get that to you. So shoot us a question, shoot me an email, I'll forward that along, and we can get you a copy of the presentation. You'll be able to print that out. So then next question, from a planning and zoning perspective, can the local unit of government regulate the siting of buildings used for processing and or the actual building, if new, that will be used for processing? Can we regulate processing as a land use in general if it's not a bona fide farming agricultural activity? So great question. And, I think the answer here is going to be probably yes. As kind of went through in the presentation, there are those two kind of sides of the argument. Is it an agricultural building? Is it not an agricultural building? I think you have a good argument to say, hey, comply with our building requirements here, because this is a regulated use that you have to get a state license for. This isn't traditional agriculture. And so we're going to regulate that. We're going to make sure that your building is located appropriately. We're going to make sure that land use is located appropriately via your zoning regulation or building code regulation, whatever you have there. Again, argument on the other side for that. So I would also encourage you to work with your township attorney early and often. Even if you're still handling a bulk of the communication and the work with the applicant. If they're amenable, then you won't have a problem, right? You can approach them and say, hey, this is our position as a township. We want you to submit this, and you're going to need a building permit if you're building a new building. And they may say, yeah, okay, that's fine. I want to be a good citizen here of the community. I don't want to make waves. Just let me know how I need to comply, and then you'll be in good shape. But let your township attorney know that you're taking that position, that you're going to have these discussions, so that then they're going to be up to speed from the very beginning. I think that's going to make everyone's life a lot easier. Other question is, what can you do with a residential house that no one lives in and the owner rents it to multiple people for growing purposes? Lots of things you can do with that. So no growing within a dwelling, right, under the Hemp Acts. So if we're talking about growing hemp, you've got an ability to bring down enforcement that way, even if no one's living in it. So some interesting questions about what is defined as a dwelling. If it's constructed for a residential use, I think that gives you a good argument. So you can shut down, potentially bring some enforcement action against that. Because it's a non-compliant structure. And then you're talking about multiple people in there for growing purposes. If it's marijuana that they're growing, also some enforcement opportunities there. If you haven't opted in, yeah, if it's marijuana, you have a lot more enforcement opportunities because of the stricter regulation at the state level for that. even if they're trying to claim some sort of patient caregiver from the initial marijuana model. You have enforcement. There's some enforcement that you can take with that with some local ordinances. So reach out to your township attorney if you don't have a caregiver ordinance. It's not about trying to restrict caregivers. I know there's a fear from those caregiver folks at a state level about that. But at the local level, at least in our experience with our clients, that is not the goal. The goal is to make sure that marijuana remains properly regulated, and that you don't have illegal growers, trying to use that as a loophole and saying, no, we want to preserve caregivers for caregiver growing and not as an illegal loophole. The other thing that I would say about this residential house, again, is reach out to the state regulator. Again, that information, they should have it. And I think you can reach out to them and work to say, hey, where's the license? If this is hemp that's being grown there, then it should be posting that sign. It should be telling you who's growing it, in addition to the problem that they can't grow it in a dwelling under the plain language of the statute. So a lot of different options that you could potentially pursue there. And again, I would encourage you to work with your township attorney, get them the facts, so that they can work with you on it and move that forward. Okay, so those are all taken care of. Let me see if there's anything in the chat. I am not seeing anything in the chat. No other open Q&A. So I'm happy to take, just a couple more minutes. And, oh, you know what I wonder if I can do? Okay, I can do this. Put my email in the chat for you guys. So that's my email there, since we did have a little bit of carryover from the previous presentation, I think. Feel free to reach out to me, shoot me an email if you've got additional questions, or if you want a copy of the presentation slides, we can get that available to you. Also, of course, we work to get these up on our website as well, so you'll be able to find it there. And of course, if you're not subscribed for a monthly e-letter, take opportunity to put your email in there so that you'll get future updates from us on topics of interest to local officials. And then again, a plug for our workshop, elected officials workshop that we're hosting December 7th. That'll be here in person in the Lansing-Okemos area. There's details again going out for that, so you can register for it. We'll feed you lunch, teach you a bunch of things, and then we'll buy you a beer afterwards at the cocktail reception. So a great time will be had by all. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. It's been helpful for you. And with that, I'm not seeing any other questions coming through. So thank you so much for being with us, and have a great day.